I'll be meeting with President Putin on Monday. We go into the meeting with a tremendous meeting that we had with NATO. Most of you have reported it correctly. It was certainly it was testy at the beginning, but at the end, everybody came together and they agreed to do what they should do, and actually what they've committed to do, which you fully adhered to. You didn't have a problem, but some people did, and we left that meeting, I think, probably more unified and wealthier as a group than ever before. So we go in strong. We'll be talking to President Putin about a number of things. Ukraine. We'll be talking about Syria. We'll be talking about other parts of the Middle East. I will be talking about nuclear proliferation because we are massively, you know what we've been doing. We've been modernizing and fixing and buying, and it's just a devastating technology. And they likewise are doing a lot. And it's a very, very bad policy. We have no choice. But we are massively big, and they are very big. And I'll be talking about nuclear proliferation. That would be a great thing if we could do. Now, it's not only us. It's not only Russia and the United States. It's other countries also. But we're the two leaders. We would be the leader. They would be second. I guess China would be third. I think we'll all be talking about that. To me, Jonathan, I think that would be a tremendous achievement if we could do something on nuclear proliferation. And we'll be talking about other things. I know you'll ask, will we be talking about meddling? And I will absolutely bring that up. I don't think you'll have any, gee, I did it, you got me. There won't be a Perry Mason here, I don't think, but you never know what happens, right? But I will absolutely, firmly ask the question. And hopefully we'll have a very good relationship with Russia. I think having, and the Prime Minister would agree, if we have a good relationship with Russia and with China and with other countries, that's a good thing, not a bad thing. So hopefully that will happen, Jonathan.
Hey, NBC News viewers, thanks for checking out our YouTube channel. Subscribe by clicking on that button down here and click on any of the videos over here to watch the latest interviews, show highlights, and digital exclusives. Thanks for watching.